Good afternoon. We gathered together to celebrate the life of Betty Davis. Though my first-hand experience with her was somewhat limited, I did have the privilege of serving with her only 2 or 3 years back in a fundraising effort for a young man from the local community who suffered a severe head injury in a motor vehicle accident. There were countless meetings in preparation for the event, and I was able and privileged to witness her in action. As I read of her passing, I could not help but think that there was a line in her obituary that epitomized what I saw in her life, and I quote, "A dignified, determined, true lady, she helped many people in many ways. Betty was an icon of community service." And I cannot help but wonder if each of us, in an attempt to follow her example, devoted only a small portion of the time and energy she herself devoted to this community, what a marvelous impact we could have. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the life and the example of Betty Davis. I pray that this gathering would honor you as we celebrate and remember. Amen.
I feel like a priest. Please be seated. Using the term barn raising is somewhat symbolic of what it has taken to pull all of the celebration together. Normally, thank you credits are given at the end, but not in this case. Norma Dolan by far has done a superior job in coordinating today's tributes. So I thank you, Norma. Betty's devotion to her community is certainly recognized by the entire community. So thank you to all the people who have helped and have attended today's tribute. I know you're too numerous to thank publicly, but hopefully we'll get to thank you personally later on. Thank you to the family and to the friends who have put together the wonderful display that hopefully you've seen in the front of the building. Thank you for the preparation of the food by the ladies of the former Women's Republican Club and the Clinton Alliance Church. Thank you to the Clinton Alliance Church as organized by Nancy Cunningham and Steve Rathjen. Thank you East Clinton Fire Department and Mary Ann Thompson. Thank you West Clinton Fire Company and Ray Oberly. A thank you should be given to the Town Board of Clinton. We've requested that their flag be flown at half-mast today. I did not check it, but it better be at half-mast. Otherwise, we're going to re-elect some new people. Only a joke. Thank you for the Town of Clinton and the Highway Superintendent, Ron Tompkins, for all the parking that's been arranged for us. Thank you to the Dutchess County Sheriff, who led the procession this morning earlier. Thank you to Colleen Bishop and to Mike Craver for leading Irish Dancer through the trails this morning with Betty's ashes on board of her favorite horse. And thank you to our speakers that you will hear this afternoon. They've come from far distances, and they'll talk about the community and what Betty meant to the community. And I think on this very special occasion, I have to thank you all. The celebration of life of Elizabeth Davis is a time when we can reflect on how our lives have been enriched by knowing her. It gives me great pleasure to introduce local resident, the Honorable Ralph Beisner, who is retired from the New York Supreme Court, to share some spiritual words as we begin today.
Good afternoon, everyone. We've come to celebrate a life well lived, a journey well traveled. I pray that the God of all comfort may bring his comfort to each one of us here this afternoon. In preparing my remarks today, I found that I resorted to using descriptive terminology that we hear less and less of in our modern society. Terms like lady, reserved, generous, passionate, thoughtful, elegant. And I know many of you can fill in your favorite memories of Betty with equally endearing terms. I'm honored and humbled to have been asked to share with you today. We have all lost a friend. I first met Betty through her beloved husband, Pud, close to 40 years ago. I know I don't look that old, but I was working as an assistant New York State Attorney General. I was a new arrival in Dutchess County. I had hopes of entering into Republican politics in the town of Clinton and eventually Dutchess County. I was introduced to this wonderful, courtly gentleman, Putnam Davis, and eventually his equally charming wife, Betty. Betty lost Put all too early in her life, and yet she always remained faithful to his memory and their combined legacy. Over the years, as I pursued my career in politics, and eventually as a state Supreme Court Justice, I always knew I had Betty's support. And I dare say many of you here today can give a similar testimony to Betty's unwavering support for your careers in politics, in business, in government, in life. She has been our friend, and we should always treasure the memories of that friendship. Whether we worked with her on Community Day and remember how she always was there with the pony rides for the children. Whether we worked with her in the restoration of the town hall. Whether we worked with her in the building of the Justice Court. Her work with town land use issues. Her work for the election of town, county, state, and federal Republican officials. I and many of you particularly remember her passion for the roundabout hunt and other equestrian adventures which she brought into our lives. Betty Davis was our friend. But I digress. Norma asked me to say something spiritual and to keep that brief. I think Norma may have been echoing Betty's sentiments. Betty was not one to share her spiritual perspectives with others, and I think she's probably looking down with a smile at the irony of a retired Supreme Court Justice, now a pastor, trying to say something spiritual at her memorial service. It is said that life is a journey, not a destination. When we reflect on Betty's life, we have to conclude she enjoyed the journey. She lived life with a passion and excitement to be admired. She sowed good into so many lives, and she reaped the harvest of her generosity of spirit throughout her life. It has been a journey well traveled, and now she has reached her destination. The Bible tells us that she is now at home with her beloved Pud and all her friends and family that have gone on before her. Scripture tells us that the things which we see in the natural are temporary, but the things which we cannot see with natural eyes are eternal. And that our current mortality is swallowed up by life. Let me close with a reading of the 23rd Psalm, which I had prepared these remarks, and then I see on the memorial card, the 23rd Psalm is inscribed on the back of that card. And I understand it was also read this morning at the cemetery. So it seems like there's a continuing theme here with the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Betty, enjoy the destination. It is well earned. Thank you for being our friend.
One of Betty's favorite songs, as Brian told me, is America. So I hope you'll join in. Our musician, Len Nelson, is going to sing that.
I'll do that now. Maybe you can help me sing the words too. Oh, beautiful, oh, spacious skies, forever waves of grain, for purple mountains, majesty, above the fluted plains. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crowned us with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. America, America, God shed his grace on thee, and crowned us with brotherhood from sea to shining sea.
This afternoon, you will be introduced to Betty's family. You will hear from representatives of organizations that she believed in and she supported. Some of the stories may bring a tear to your eye, but most of them will bring a smile to your face and make you feel proud that you were part of Betty's life. First, I'd like to introduce Brian Davis, who will introduce the family.
Let me just say one thing as a witness. There are not enough people for me to not be emotional. For every hour of work that was done by Norma, or by me, or any of you, there were 10 done by Owen and Norma. And that deserves a hell of a lot of praise, as far as I'm concerned. They're pleasant people. Now, to my family, I'll try to do it quickly. Everyone is here, except for about 7 cousins. But, oh, well, 7, 1 is here, so it's only 6. I will start, not with age, but beauty, with my wife, Bobby. And next is sweetheart. I call her Francie. She likes that because that's what she was called when she was a little girl. Her proper name is Francesca. Then we get to Katie, and Austin, and Emily, and Paul, and Brian, Jennifer. And then to the cabooses, we've got Shannon and Hannah, and young Davis, and my little buddy, Katie, another Katie. They traveled here. My guess would be an average of 1,000 miles to get here. I'm just very, very impressed. Thank you.
Brian's oldest daughters, Katie and Emily, are going to share their remarks next. Kate, Emily.
The most memorable times with Betty revolved around the Ebarl Ranch out in Montana. My family's been going with Betty for the past 10 years. The ranch and Betty and our ranch friends have become woven into the fabric of our lives. For years afterwards, when we were kids, Putt and Betty took us out to the ranch for a couple of summers. For years afterwards, she would send a postcard or a letter from the ranch with a sprig of sagebrush. It just burst with fragrance. I kept it in my drawer to remind me of Montana. When I went back to the ranch for the first time 30 years later with my own family, the ranch looked just the same. And that's a good thing. That's what makes it so special and such a unique experience. For Betty, it was a way of sharing a bit of her world with us and her love of the West from the time she was a child spending the summers with Grandma Reno, and the first trip to the Dude Ranch with school chums for a high school graduation present. That's where some of the adventures and incredible experiences began. We would be on a morning ride with Betty or sitting on her cabin porch, and she would launch into some story about the early days as a guest at the EBRL, or working on the hay crew as an only female, at another ranch, or moving herds of cattle on all-day drives. A definite work hard, play hard kind of life. Oh, the stories she could tell. And they were quite the pranksters, too. Ask me later how she got the name Chili, which stuck for the next 70 years. Betty and I shared a love of Montana wildflowers. Going on her rides with her, she would point out every blooming plant on the hillside or along the riverbank. Last summer, we sat on her cabin porch, and between us began to list the flowers we had seen on the ranch around. We came up with 27 different kinds of wildflowers, and I added another 4 this year, so we're now at 31. So the tradition continues with me. When my daughter Shannon was applying to college, she wrote an essay about Betty as someone who has inspired her and made a lasting impression in her life. It began, at 90 years old, my great-grandmother still rides all over the Montana countryside on a horse named Diablo, which means devil. She's an elegant lady who wears lipstick, pearls, and a hairnet. But she's an absolute spitfire. Age is but a number to her, and even at 90, she lives life with a passion and speed someone's decades younger. In her current condition, is not inspiring enough. Her adventurous life is nothing short of amazing. Betty inspired a lot of people, probably more than she could have imagined. She lived a life of concentric circles, sometimes overlapping, sometimes on different planes. but she was the common draw. Such circles included the Barrow Ranch, the Elkhorn Ranch in Arizona, skiing in Vail, Lake Placid, her Montana pack trip and fishing trip friends, float trips, Alaska adventures, as well as the Hunt Club, pony rides, and the numerous community groups, missions, and activities around here. Betty was in the middle of it all. It's exhausting just thinking about how much effort she put into everything. We just got back from the ranch. There was a small memorial and tribute for Betty while we were there. Many of her ranch friends from the past 10 to 20 years were there, along with some of her dearest friends in Montana. Let me share a little bit about the Montana part of this memorial and celebration of life, which along with today, closes the circle of her life. Betty's memorial in Montana started with a small ceremony at a tranquil spot along the Blackfoot River. We gathered at the river's edge. The minister and longtime friend quoted a passage from Norman Maclean's A River Runs Through It, a story about the Blackfoot River. He said, "The voices of those we love are in the rocks, and the river runs through it." We each took a small river rock and offered a word that we associate with Betty. Things like inspiration, integrity, kindness, courage, strength, gusto, generosity, dear friend, travel and adventure, fearless, horses and skiing. Then one by one we threw the rocks into the river, sending up our thoughts of Betty. Her ashes were scattered in the river near where her dear friend Betty DuPont is buried, so now they can be together again. The minister closed with a Celtic blessing. Afterwards, back at the ranch, a large gathering of friends and guests gave Betty a warm and memorable send-off, including a grand entrance and remarks by her favorite horse, Diablo, who whinnied at some very punctual moments, as if to communicate his own thoughts of Betty. Friends shared their favorite memories and stories about Betty. She certainly has an incredible presence and vibrant legacy. Her spirit is very much alive and well in Montana, and a river runs through it for all to share in her memory. For those who knew her, there's a little bit of Betty in all of us, and hopefully we can carry on in her absence. That is her lasting legacy. I will always cherish the times we had with Betty and the inspiration she leaves us. And when I need a quick reminder, I can go back to the river in my mind and feel her with me. Just like a river runs through it, Betty runs through us all. To me, the Celtic poem that was read at the riverside captures Betty's spirit and legacy. Let us not look for you only in memory, where we would grow lonely without you. You would want us to find you in presence, beside us when beauty brightens, when kindness glows, when orchids brighten the earth, in every heart that loves you. May you continue to inspire us, to enter each day with a generous heart, to serve the call of courage and love until we see your beautiful face again. In that land where there is no more separation, where all tears will be wiped from our mind, and where we will never lose you again.
I'm Emily Davis Knight, granddaughter number 2. Betty built an incredible legacy, which we will all miss, but from which we have learned so much. She demonstrated stewardship for her community by leaving it in a better place than before, such as renovating the Clinton Town Hall in memory of her beloved hut. Also, Betty always had a determination to live life to the fullest and to carry on, even through adversity at times. She would plan for events that would bring friends together, and then be the preeminent hostess at dinner and drinks, hers being doers on the rocks. When we were young adults, we were so fortunate to share in her everyday goings-on, the behind-the-scenes that taught us so much. We were also fortunate to be invited on her adventures, whether to Dude Ranch's the Elkhorn in Arizona or the Ebarl in Montana, as if she didn't have enough horse time back home, or her trips to Vail, which started when Put passed away and she couldn't bear to be at home without him for Christmas. In Vail, Betty was delighted when my sister Katie and I knew nearly every single male ski instructor, probably because it reminded her of her winters in Aspen, when skiing in the U.S. was still novel. As a career woman, Betty became my role model early on. Plus being very well read on all sorts of topics and a great outdoorsman. Even as the second woman ever on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange when she worked for Merrill Lynch, or as a senior buyer at the flagship retailers in New York City, Betty would quit her job after a year or two in order to go skiing for a few months, knowing that when she returned to New York City, she could find an even better job. We loved hearing stories about all of her adventures in those early days and her lifelong friendships. My grandfather, Put, and Betty had such an endearing marriage, with Betty working mighty hard to perfect how to cook rice for Put, and bringing some spice into his life with fox hunting. Betty once told us that her life began when she married Put, which would have been when she was 45, halfway through her full life. How amazing that she still got tears in her eyes when she told certain stories about him all these years later. And with all of Put's wisdom, he would just smile and shake his head at so many of her Bettyisms, which is a term coined by my sister Jen. These Bettyisms would include saying "yoo-hoo" when she walked in the house or on the trail, her doers, her incredible love of history, her storytelling, her scrambled eggs with a half a stick of butter, her laugh, her love of life, her love of Put, her ability to change from barn clothes into an elegant outfit in 5 minutes just as the dinner guests arrived, her stubbornness, or shall we call it determination, her love of horses, golden retrievers, and greyhounds, her respect for those who work hard and reach their goals, her thoughtful postcards and letters, which are the reason for her lifelong friendships without even using email or cell phones. Betty had a gift of connecting with people to find common interests. I feel very blessed that my kids got to spend time with their great-grandmother, since we live only an hour and a half away. They easily found their own connections with Betty and miss her tremendously. For my 11-year-old son Davis, he loved hearing her stories, and they shared the love of land. Davis has lots of success fishing in her ponds, or is otherwise off exploring or catching frogs. In fact, there's a frog at the end of the driveway in that little pond who we can hear cheering every time our car drives home. For my 9-year-old daughter, Katie Jr., which is what we call her, Katie Jr., they shared the love of animals, especially horses. Do you remember when Put and Betty had 21 barn cats, in addition to a barn full of horses and 2 dogs? In fact, my father just told a story about how when her border collie went deaf, being very old, Betty taught her border collie sign language. My daughter was very inspired by Betty, who was riding her horses up to the very end. It was truly amazing. For my husband Paul, it was golf. He would always try to outdo Betty with his list of golf courses that he had played on. But with Betty's 3 hole-in-ones in her golfing days, he rarely outdid Betty's achievements. They also shared the same point of view on politics, thank goodness. For me, I love Betty telling the story of how she inherited grandchildren when she married Put in 1968, and really didn't know much about kids. When we went to visit them for 2 weeks from Kentucky, Put simply told Betty, "Just keep them busy and you'll do fine." Well, clearly that worked, because at dinner, after our first full day there, I put my head down on the dining room table and fell asleep. Terrible manners, even for a 5-year-old, but a real compliment to Betty. We promptly adopted her into our family and have had so many wonderful times since then, including my spending Thanksgiving together since I was 14 years old. The favorite memory of Betty from my father, Brian, went like this. For 42 years, he would call her up to say, "Happy Mother's Day," and for 42 years, she would say, "I am not your mother." And then they would laugh. With the passing of Betty, who would have turned 91 this past Tuesday, We saw the end of an era. Betty, we miss you, and we will try to carry on your legacy.
Brian's daughter, Jennifer, and young Brian are going to be our next.
I'll be speaking on behalf of both of us. I'm Brian and Mrs. Jennifer. We want to share a few of our memories, which for us are a tad bit more recent than Katie and Emily. Not a lot, but a tad bit more recent. We started coming up to the farm when I must have been 4, 5, or 6. And for a couple of city slickers, everything was exciting, absolutely everything. Growing up on the farm in the summer, we remember that we would take carrots and go to the barn, feed the horses after dinner. It became a tradition that we would do. We would go see the hound puppies up at the kennel, or at least we'd hear the hounds at night, back when there were hounds up at the kennel. And then, of course, there's, we mentioned the half stick of butter that was in the eggs. There were other really wonderful and tasty things that we grew to love at Betty's house. One of them being corn toasties, which we don't have in the South. So when we come up here, we just consume copious amounts of corn toasties. Jams. Betty had an entire drawer full of jams that most recently have been filled by tons of jars of currants, lots of jams for poached eggs, and of course I remember Betty finding a reason to put cream on just about everything. We remember the happy hour that would come just about every day at about 5 o'clock with appetizers that a 6 and 8-year-old would not usually find, such as raw broccoli and salt, brie cheese and crackers. We had so much brie cheese. But we would spend most of our days shuttled off to, just like Em and Katie, we would be shuttled off to various activities, and one of the most exciting for us was going to Southlands down the road for riding lessons. And one of our best memories was the year that Betty suggested we join the family class competition. And this is where the whole family does one big routine together. And we had 4 white horses. And you all know who was in charge of those 4 white horses. My sister unbelievably remembers their names: Snapshot, Tonto, Gungadin, and Paris. And all I remember is that I was so little on Paris that my legs went this way on a fat. But we won the blue ribbon. And the picture was in the kitchen just above the desk for several years after that. A real prize for us, a prize memory. Jen and I, maybe like Davis, and maybe you guys, caught our first fishes in those ponds. Jennifer's was a little bit less tactful than mine. She just threw a hook in the water and a fish came out. I remember that same kitchen. We saw some of the signs in the field this morning. I remember my favorite one was the Latin one that said, translated, said, "Don't let the bastards get you down." I remember seeing that one year after year after year, written in Latin, so just a beautifully ironic little placard. If you've been in that kitchen, you saw a stack of calendars. One time on a visit, I looked to see how far back they went. 1966. And as Jennifer and I were thinking about those calendars, we were wondering how many people in this room have little squares with their names on them for her contributions and social activities with each of us in this room. One of the other things we remember about the house, and really for us, the memory of Betty comes with the memory of the farm, the memory of the house. We remember walking up the 3 steps by the front entrance and how the grandfather clock would always chime with each step you would take. So if we were in the kitchen, we would know when Betty was coming straight up as she would come down. Jennifer very happily remembers being with Betty at the Elkhorn Ranch for a couple years, 2009, 2010. And we were both there in '91, where I was 11 and just too young to wrangle, and Jennifer got to wrangle. We had, as I know Shannon and Hannah have, had the time of their lives out in Montana. And I'd just like to close with a couple thoughts about Betty. I can say that I've never revered a person more than Betty. I thought long and hard about what word captured her for me, and it's actually reverence. I'll never forget her never give up attitude. I used to love to brag that my grandmother went whitewater rafting. Was your grandmother? And as Emily said, her undying affection for a pet, 30 years later, he'd bring a tear to her eye. Just very true and deep love. And I leave you just with one thought. I'm a photographer in the family, and I take pictures of everything. I decided to stay behind at the gravesite today. I'd never seen an interment before, so I stayed behind just to see how it happened. And as the shovels full of dirt were put into the hole, and Betty's remains were placed there as well, 2 white butterflies danced. And that'll be my final memory.
I truly can say that Betty is very proud of her family, and certainly she's very proud of the wonderful remarks that you've given us today. A community is all about having good neighbors. Therefore, I would like to introduce Vivian Malloy, who is the owner of the Addition Farm, to be our next speaker.
My name is Vivian Malloy. Betty and I are very close neighbors. Our land abuts each other in the woods. And of course we saw each other when I rode and she always rode. And I just want to say a few things about being a neighbor and having a great neighbor. In life there are moments when you hit a lucky streak. I got so lucky when buying my farm because it included the gift of Betty as a neighbor and a friend. She told me about the Clays and the history of Clay Haven Farm. I had no idea when I bought it. It was amazing. And immediately she made a request. Could you do something about the dump? I had not even walked the rest of my property, the 80 acres, across the street yet. So I got on my trusty steed and went up alone, and I was horrified, dumbfounded. A huge 20-year pile of horror. And so I cleaned it up post-haste, and our relationship started off on a high note. I did not realize, coming into this community, because I had grown up in the suburbs, how precious it was for all of us to be landowners so that people could ride on our land and hunt on the land. And so I immediately was greeted with such respect and kindness from Betty. And I would see her out in the woods with her staff clearing, hacking away. Oh, good morning, as I went by. Without each other, there was no way that anybody could ride cross-country or hike or cross-country ski or anything. We had no gates between us at all. She was the kindest, most complimentary person I knew. She made me feel so welcome, and she loved the fact that we together would protect and steward all this beautiful property, the land we were fortunate enough to own. She made sure I was invited to all the horsey events and introduced me to my friend and now resident photographer, Kathy Landon. She was a lady who loved her horses as much as I did. And I knew how lucky I was to have her next door. We admired each other, we helped each other, which is what neighbors should do. But I was luckier than most. I found a farm and a friend, and forever I thank you, Betty. I will keep things as beautiful as they are now, and I hope I will make you proud. Thank you.
Betty had similar interests to her husband, Hud. And one of them was who should hold political office. So I'd like to just recognize that we have Senator Saland. Steve Saland is here with us today. And Dutchess County Executive Mark Molinaro. Mark is going to address us next.
I was 23 years old and the mayor of the village of Tivoli when I received a phone call from then County Legislator Fran Mark, who suggested to me that she was planning to retire, having served the community in the county legislature for a number of years, and had encouraged me to consider running to succeed her. I said that was a wonderful idea, but I hadn't paid much attention to anything beyond the four boundaries of the village of Tivoli. And when I learned of the breadth of her district, Tivoli, Red Hook, Milan, Clinton, I have to be honest, I had never visited Clinton. I didn't know Clinton existed. But as she expressed to me a desire to run, I immediately fell in love with the concept. And I agreed to do so. She said to me, however, you can't be a candidate and you will not win unless you receive the support of Betty Davis. I have to be honest. I had never heard of Betty Davis. And I did not know why I needed her acceptance. So a meeting was arranged and I came to the property, to the house, and again, just a young kid. I didn't know what to expect or who I would meet. And when I met Betty, and she walked me around the house, story after story, room after room, picture after picture. She walked me around the property, story after story, acre after acre, building after building, blade of grass after blade of grass. She told me of tales of skiing, of whitewater rafting, working at the ranch, obviously maintaining her own property, continued her love of horses, and by the time I was done, I was exhausted. And I thought at that moment that this woman is never going to accept me. I feel so insignificant. And I said to her, why don't you run? I felt lazy. She then, after telling me that she thought I would do a fine job, she then explained to me and certainly expressed her love for Put, but also his dedication and commitment to our community and our county. And she said that she was hopeful that I could carry on in such a legacy. And it was at that moment that I realized that I was, in fact, insignificant. And she laid before me, as I know that she laid before others seeking elected office, a challenge to be and to do better. And on my way home that day from Clinton to Tivoli, which isn't the shortest of drives in Dutchess County, I had thought, on one hand, I was brought back in time to a generation, to a period where class and dignity, grace and elegance was how we had hoped to live. And then on the other hand, somehow had gone to an alternate universe where being 70 or 80 or 90, you could continue to act as if you were 10 or 12 or 15 and do all the things that you had hoped to do. What an amazing woman. And all I would offer to you is that I think in all of our lives, we don't often meet people that we could honestly say, I don't think I've ever met anyone like her, nor will I meet anyone like her again. For me, personally, I can tell you that Betty Davis is and has been that person. Year after year, calling to check in on how I was doing. When I moved on from public service, no longer representing the town of Clinton, which, by the way, I came to love and adore. In many ways, for the years I represented this community, felt as if it was my home. I know that she had helped make that happen. But she always wanted to know how I was doing, but always left before me the challenge of doing better, reminding me of Put, reminding me of her service to the community. So I'm here today, despite Norma's hope that I would be brief, I'm here today because of personal affection for an amazing woman. And I'm also here because today, thanks to her support, I represent this county and this community that she loves. And on behalf of this county, to all of you and to her family, we are profoundly grateful. Public service today, you could say today generically, but sadly in New York State today, is marred by circus-like behavior, by decision-making that seems always to be about point scoring or personal gratification. God knows, we read the paper and you can see, just look a little further south or north and realize that it is not the dignified duty that it was once referred to. In our lives, and in many ways in public service, we're encouraged to burn our own trail, cut our own trail, go out as if independence and individualism is some point of success or some marker of achievement. You know, I would suggest in public service today, emulating someone else in all that bad. Betty Davis cut the path for us. She cut the trail for us. And despite the fact that she may have reached her destination, and I want to end with one thought in that regard, she continues to cut the trail for us. And I know in my daughter, and I certainly can imagine in all of you, but for all of us, for those of us who wish to contribute to the success and betterment of our community, I don't know that individualism and independence is necessary. Why don't we emulate her? Seek to be nearly as good as her, to contribute nearly as much as she did, and to express compassion and generosity and dedication in even the slightest of ways as she did. When I received word of her passing, I must admit that sadness wasn't the first thing that came to mind. It was utter amazement. I'm a good Christian boy, but I figured God would never get her. And when I was a child, I was told that heaven is paved with golden roads, path upon path of golden roads, and there are doors, doors upon doors. I had no idea why, but I'm pretty confident. She's running, she's hiking, she's riding a horse with Put down all of them, and she is probably telling a story at every one of those doors. To her family, to all of you, God bless you. And to all of us, let's keep her life alive by service and commitment to one another. She's cut the trail for us. We merely need to follow along. God bless and thank you.
Congressman Chris Gibson was here earlier today, and he waited for Irish dancer and Betty's ashes to be brought into a field. And I saw his reflection in his eyes, and he was very remorseful. He presented a flag to Put's son, Brian, and gave it with the wishes of the United States. He's not able to attend today because he had another commitment, but he has a representative here, Patty Holman, who is going to read a letter from the Congressman.
As mentioned earlier, Chris was here at Betty's home, reflecting on her incredible life and what she meant to this community and to people close to her. Betty means a lot to Chris. He holds her very close in his heart. And matter of fact, we have, thanks to Lori Brands, a wonderful picture in our Hyde Park office with Chris and Betty at her home at one of those annual Meet the Candidates night at her home. And he's sorry he couldn't make this portion of the ceremony, but he wanted me to read this letter. Dear friends and family, I write to you today to offer my deepest sympathies for the loss of Betty Davis. She lived an extraordinary life, and I am honored to recognize her contributions to the people of the town of Clinton and the Hudson Valley. I was blessed to know Betty Davis during my time as a candidate and a member of Congress. My family, staff, and I knew her to be a generous, caring person and someone who cared deeply for her community. She shared her time, talents, and resources in support of countless projects and worthy causes. From her work with the Women's Republican Club to her leadership on the Town Hall Restoration Project to her equestrian activities, Betty touched many lives here in Clinton. Betty brought people together. She was the type of person who inspired me to serve the public in elected office. I am honored to help pay tribute to her strong character, good citizenship, love of the great outdoors, and devotion to friends and family. She has gone to her heavenly reward, and this certainly fills me with warmth and gratitude. Feel free to contact me if I can assist you during this difficult time and weeks and months ahead. I pray that God comforts you and protects you in your travels. Congressman Chris Gibson.
We continue with the story of politics. The former Women's Republican Club of the town of Clinton was one of Betty's true loves. And Joyce Tomaselli is here to talk about that.
Betty's love of and devotion to the town of Clinton ran deep. Her desire was simple, to make the town a better place for everyone. Sometimes she was the visible project leader, and more often she worked behind the scenes. She was persistent, tenacious, sometimes imperious, and even difficult. In the end, she always got the job done and was more than generous with credit and compliment. I'd like to mention a few of her accomplishments. In 1978, she started on a series of improvements to our 1920s town hall just up the road here. She'd say, "Put thought I needed a project." The heating, wiring, and lighting were updated. The lower level was cleaned. She often starts cleaning and then going on. It was painted and furnished. In 1979, in April, that space was dedicated to Helena Van Vliet, the town historian, and it remains in active use today. In the booklet that Betty wrote on the town hall's history, she stated, "All work and costs donated, no charge to Mr. Taxpayer." 1978 also saw the first of many Meet the Candidates cocktail parties. At the time, it was $5 donation. Last year, it was $20 donation. Not bad for 35 years. Another 1978 fundraiser was making Christmas wreaths to sell. These traditions continued almost every year until her death some 35 years. Betty then moved her town hall focus upstairs in the 1980s with more cleaning, adding drapes, framed sketches of historical homes, new chairs and coat racks. She also, outside, focused on landscaping and annual flower plantings with a commitment to beautify the town hall each and every year. Every year, Betty manned the hose daily, keeping things green and growing. She joked that her hose skills came from her World War II fire training during her Vassar College days. In 1985, she also did things like improvements to the town's phone system, office space, and furniture. I found some minutes from then. The professionals estimated these items at 3 times what the town had budgeted. What did Betty do? She turned to the town's residents to raise the funds and keep it off the tax rolls. How did she do it? With bake sales and progressive dinners, the wreath making, the cocktail parties, pancake breakfasts, strawberry dinners, fashion shows, raffles, silent auctions, and still more bake sales. She'd say, if there is food, they will come. After Putt's death, Betty added the Justice Wing to the town hall. Named for and in honor for her much-loved husband, Betty celebrated their love for Clinton. This major gift came at an opportune moment. New York State's Office of Court Administration had ruled that Clinton could no longer hold court on a card table situated in the main floor's hall. There's a very funny write-up here if you see it in back where she describes the rickety card table and things like that. There were rules requiring a raised dais as well as many other technical details. The Putnam Davis Memorial Court was Betty's answer to a serious town problem. Others have mentioned it today. In 2002, a new committee was formed for a major restoration of the town hall. Betty led a nonpartisan team of about 30 volunteers, and I was pleased to be part of it. I was secretary. The building needed a general sprucing up, cleaning, new steps, a new porch, new siding, replacement windows, and improvements to the lighting and a new roof. Betty was adamant this project was for the community, and it was going to be funded from the community with no additional taxation. To Betty's delight, the community came through. People donated expertise, materials, equipment, time, and money. In 3 years, $200,000 was raised from a residency of less than 1,800 households. Not bad. How? Betty was tireless. She led direct appeals to the community, politicians, and individuals. Our committee sold commemorative bricks, which you can go look at, held a brunch and craft fair. I remember a masquerade ball. I remember all sorts of things, some tea parties, more bake sales, cocktail parties, etc. Parenthetically, we're remembering, I think the former library person who pounded a nail into the new town hall front door still has not quite recovered from Betty's tongue lashing. Betty's last big townwide project focus was the farmland protection and open space plan that the town of Clinton was working on with the committee. She was passionate about preserving the beauty of our town and committed to the conservation of working farmland. Our group focused on raising residents' awareness of our town, especially its farms, and educated all about opportunities for conservation. Once again, we sponsored trips around town to Edison Farm, to several people's here. We sponsored brunches, lunches, and we even had an apple pie baking contest. Betty made significant conservation decisions for her own land and positively influenced others to do the same. As I struggled for a summary of Betty's tireless work for the betterment of her town, I found a 1979 letter from then Congressman Hamilton Fish Jr. Betty had invited him to the dedication of the first project, the Van Fleet Room. And Senator Saland, I remember you said something very similar when we had the town hall restoration opening. Here's what Hamilton Fish said. I must say I am impressed with the fine, public-spirited approach of the Clinton Women's Republican Club in undertaking something for the community at no cost to the taxpayer. I have always maintained that good citizens, I'll start again. I have always maintained that good citizenship is the best politics. And your gesture of contributing to the community with volunteer labor and donated money to benefit everyone is an excellent example which hopefully will be followed by others. Thank you again, and looking forward to seeing the results of your labors in the near future and your imaginative endeavors. She did wonderful things for this town.
I'm Janet Haberstock, president of the former Women's Republican Club, and Vice President Mary Ann Thompson. We all know Betty was dynamic and imposing. She was a true leader and a force to be reckoned with. When she singled one of us out, we knew we'd be getting our marching orders. Very, very tough to say no to Betty. When she started the small group known as the Town of Clinton Women's Republican Club in 1978, she was its motivating energy and its life force. Whatever she did wholeheartedly. Nothing half-baked and nothing less than first class, ever. For over 30 years, she led the charge for Republican values and ideals and gave back to the community at every turn. No lip service from her. She was on her hands and knees doing the work, whether weeding and nurturing the plants at Town Hall, or refurbishing the Van Fleet Room, or organizing the town offices, or any of the other projects undertaken by the WRC. Who can forget the strawberry dinners or the meet the candidate cocktail parties? She was generous, in fact overly generous, to her adopted town of Clinton. She was also courageous, gracious, and indomitable. She could be feisty and imperious, but never, never for personal gain. We loved her and admired her, and we will miss her forever.
One very important service organization is the Lions Club. And Frank Crimmins is here, I hope, to discuss, to speak to you about Betty's participation in the Lions Club.
I'm Frank Crimmins from the Nine Partners Lions Club, to which Betty was a member. Betty became a lion for many of the same reasons that she was motivated to do a lot of other things. She wanted to help people. She wanted to give back to her community. Some of the things that she did with us at the Lions Club ranged from buying Christmas presents for needy children, all the way up to personally sponsoring some of our fundraisers. You could always see her at the second hall of our golf tournament, sitting in her lawn chair, judging our hole-in-one contest, or bringing platters of food to our different functions, or giving us advice on how we can help individuals and families in the town of Clinton. She displayed all of the characteristics that lions try to become. I once heard her referred to as the First Lady of Clinton. And our group will miss her greatly, as I'm sure everybody who knew her well will miss her. And we give our condolences to the family.
Horses were a major part of Betty's world. The first guest to speak about fox hunting was Jillian Perry. She's a longtime friend of Betty's, both on horseback and on the slopes of Vale.
I'm Gillian Sykes Perry. I'm the ex-master of foxhounds of the Fairfield County Hounds. I've been asked to speak to you about Betty's fox hunting days. Some days before her death, I put some thoughts on paper for a letter that I wish I'd had the opportunity to read to her. Instead, I've chosen to read it to you today. It starts, "Dearest Betty, you have been my friend and mentor for many, many years. Whether it was advice on horsemanship, hound breeding, kennel management, hunt policies, skiing, living life after divorce, and after widowhood, you inspired the very best. You will always be my friend, with a capital F. Betty, you were always the consummate fox hunting lady. From your introduction to the sport as a high school student at Ethel Walker, and later as a Vassar College undergraduate, you took to the hunting field with fearless spirit, unparalleled flair, enjoyment of good company and old traditions. You were welcome to ride as a member of the prestigious Romba Hunt. According to your own recounting, you rode to hounds in the company of some of the legends of New England fox hunting, the most noted being Homer Gray, MFH, Richmond Meyer, MFH, Franklin Roosevelt Jr., MFH. I can only imagine you as a young woman who doubtlessly impeccably turned out and mounted on an attractive thoroughbred horse, caught the eye of one of Rombat's most influential and eligible landowners, Mr. Putnam Davis of Plattsburgh, New York. Soon afterwards, you were married to your beloved Putt. Then, in 1968, you were invited to become joint master of the hunt, Mrs. Putnam Davis, MFH. That is when you became the synonym for how to organize a hunt club. Knowledgeable, mannerly, strictly traditional, always beautiful and charming, you were, and forever will be, the textbook model of the lady master. With your horses turned out to shine like polished metal, your bespoke riding clothes, your ever-present hairnet, and gleaming boots, you were always the perfect example of how it should be done. As an excellent horsewoman, you were also an expert on the bloodlines of your foxhounds, generous with your professional staff, and even housed the kennels at your Hollow Road farm. As a considerable force in the Masters of Foxhounds Association of the United States of America, you represented the New England hunts as a regional representative. You knew and respected your landowners and their families personally, and for many years you hosted the annual landowners party. You were a woman to be reckoned with at all times. Betty, you were not without your detractors. For those who crossed you, you could be headstrong and demanding. Always living up to a high standard that you set for yourself, you expected the same from others. Perhaps you were unaware of the two gentlemen masters at Fairfield County Hounds, who feared you to the point that they called you the Dragon Lady. On the occasion of a joint meet between our hunts, they handed over the field to their newly appointed and very junior joint master, yours truly. The two, one a titan of industry and the other a top Wall Street financier, hid in the back of the field. Neither possessed even a quarter of your knowledge of our sport, and both were intelligent enough to admit it. Soon after moving off from the meet, Pat picked up a deer, and they were off to the races. The Fairfield huntsman, looking to provide some sport, was slow to call them off the scent. As the cry of the hounds rang out across the countryside, you, dear Betty, looked down from your enormous thoroughbred horse, Kingsway, and exclaimed, "Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear." There was no fooling you, Madam Visiting Master. Many changes have taken place over the years. Our sport is a different scene these days. We look back and say what's been said so many times before. We are glad that we knew it when it was the best of times. We look back and remember mornings on horseback, good scenting, great hounds. We remember those who have gone before us and hope that will be those who come after us. Our paths will cross with new people, new ideas, and in new country. My hope is that all of us will look back and remember you, Mrs. Putnam Davis, MFH, as one of the greats. I know how you loved your life. You made life good for those around you. You expected respect, and you earned it. And I, for one, will respect your memory and cherish our friendship to the end of my days. I shall remember always the wealth of your knowledge, your indomitable spirit, your bravery in times of stress and illness. I see you riding up to the gates of heaven, to the great joint meet in the sky, and causing quite a stir as you join your beloved Putt, your favourite horses, Kingsway, Golden Peak, and Squire, a pack of American foxhounds, several rescued greyhounds, golden retrievers, and bobtailed cats, and brightly smiling and crying, "Yee-haw!" as they ask in return, "What took you so long?" Tally-ho, dear friend, tally-ho, and gone away.
I now have the pleasure to introduce A.C. Kershaw, who will speak about the days of the early Wombow hunt.
Well, at the risk of sounding a little redundant, I first met Betty in 1950 when Wombow hunt was located at Greenville Farms in Poughkeepsie, just south of Vassar College. You can believe how long ago that was. And I could tell you some wonderful stories about those days. In later years, Betty was master of foxhounds and field master of Wombow. She loved her horses, the hounds, and foxhunting. She was admired and respected by all the landowners who let us gallop over their beautiful farms. She was generous to her Clinton community and many people in the town of Clinton. In the hunting field, Betty was strict. She kept true to the protocol and tradition of foxhunting and made sure we all did too. A Shelby nameless lady one day appeared for the first hunt with 4 great loops in her ear. Betty welcomed her and said, "You'll be all right. Just don't run into me." And with a steely stare at her ears, she said, "Next time, please show up appropriately for the foxhunting field." Who does not, this has been said earlier, but who does not remember Betty when we were all partying, carrying on, drinking, and she wanted our attention and it was, there are many things to list about Betty.
Betty shared her love of the town of Clinton and the Hudson Valley with Montana and Arizona. Please welcome Jason Cathcart, who was a wrangler at the Elkhorn Ranch in Arizona, and Jason will tell us about Betty on the ranch.
I didn't even write anything down today. You guys are a lucky family, I have to say that. Tough broad. Yeah, she... toughest lady I know. A story. We went out, it was springtime. She always came out for 2-3 weeks with several of her friends, pointing out flowers, leaning off her horse saying, "Penstemon," you know. It's like, yeah, I rode right past it, I saw it, but everybody else now knows, and so does the ride across the canyon. Anyhow, we leave, we're going all day. She's got to go the longest, the hardest ride, and show that how tough she is to everybody, which is honorable in my mind with her. But it's an early spring day, not cold, not hot, and I was wearing a brand new straw. I didn't see how to piece all this together. Her horse that she rode at the Elkhorn named George, he had 1, maybe 2 screws loose on his horse, and I don't know if you know, center of a horse, there's a little swirly mark between the forehead. Depending on the placement of that, it's said is if he's level-headed or not. George has 2. And if stuff's not right, then he doesn't want anything to do with it. So we're going all day. We take off at a little lope, or canter, and gust of wind hits me, my hat goes flying. And you hear this pretty high-pitched shriek come from behind me. I think, well, gosh, I don't want to even turn around to see. She was 85 probably at that point. I can only imagine what I'm going to see. Now, the rule of thumb, kind of a rule, if one of the guests loses their hat, it's a 6-pack of beer for the bar that they have to buy. And Betty doesn't drink beer, so it costs me a bottle of scotch. So we go on through the day, being reminded multiple times that she likes Dewar's, and she's going to enjoy every drink she gets from that bottle. Nice spring day. We get up to the top of our ride. We have lunch, and we're headed back home, and a bank of clouds rolls in, and it was 40 degrees, and everybody, when we left that morning, it was 80 degrees, so nobody was ready for that. And we couldn't get off the mountain fast enough. And then it started sprinkling and raining on us, and wind blowing. Going along, and I'm up front shivering, wondering why would we want to even be out there. But you look back, check and make sure everybody's okay. And she'd always, if you checked on her, watching, as you're coming down, she'd always smile, stick her hand way up in the air like this, and just, wonderful. Or yeehaw, that was, another. Well, you'd look back, and she would grin and go along, and I kept myself going, There's an 85-year-old woman back there that is the toughest person I know, right there. I don't know what to go. You guys are lucky. That's what she's an exceptionally extraordinary woman that liked her scotch. And when she'd have a cocktail party, if your glass got down where you had 2 more drinks, that was unacceptable. She's well missed. Charlie Miller needs to be here to talk, because he knew her better than I did. I only knew her for 10 years. But she made an impression for sure. You guys are all lucky for knowing her. Thank you.
We have all been blessed to know Betty, Elizabeth C. Davis, Mrs. Putnam Davis, or however you addressed her. One person that's here used to address her as the Great Lady. We celebrate her love for life and her persistence to achieve the goals that she set for herself. I hope that you took note today of the inscription on the gravestone. If you haven't, please make a visit. It says, "All the virtues of a leading lady: commitment, poise, and benefactor." The word benefactor is really a mild title that I would use. But I would use this to describe her charitable nature, and it certainly applies to Betty. What Betty has done for the town of Clinton that all of you may know, and things that she did that you may not know, is outstanding. We can never duplicate this generosity, but it is Norma Dolan's and my hope that you'll consider a contribution to the Elizabeth Davis Memorial Fund, which is being set up to do the things that Betty did while she was alive. And I'll discuss it later if you would like. For good reason, I cannot understate the word benefactor. A number of years ago, Betty became the grantor of a charitable remainder trust. And it was appropriately titled the Putnam and Elizabeth C. Davis Charitable Trust. Charities were very important to her as well as to her late husband, Bud. And the charities that are named in this charitable trust as the recipients of the funds are numerous. Her love for the land and the people is distinctly clear when you hear some of the names or the organizations that I'm going to share with you. Not all of them, but some of them. She has 6 charities associated with the American Indian. Charities regarding land conservation. A charity, the Ocean Conservancy. Numerous charities about animal causes. Numerous charities with regard to veterans organizations. Several children's homes. 2 local hospital foundations. The local fire company. In all, there are 45 charities named as beneficiaries of this trust. I've been very fortunate to be the trustee of this trust since inception, and I will carry out Betty's wishes as she gave to me. So you can certainly understand when I use the word benefactor, it becomes synonymous with the name Elizabeth C. Davis. I'm sure that you're all familiar with the Frank Capra's movie, It's a Wonderful Life. And there's a scene when the little girl says, "Every time you hear a bell ring, an angel gets his wing." This is for you, Betty. Thank you, Betty. It's been an honor for us to be here to celebrate your life. Thank you.